think many people are astonished that people would sacrifice a possibility of comfort and what's thought to be an agreeable life, and to a life of uncertainty and loneliness, perhaps, and where you are engaged in to them, incomprehensible activity with results which were fairly unlikely to change or affect your situation in an economic way. And the thought of that seems to many people astonishing. I think probably to anyone who isn't trying to do something like that.
In effect, it's a matter of not having choice.
Or having made, being dedicated to a certain way of life, to do with decisions that you've made of what you want to do with your days. And that should go.
Yes. Yes.
Lucien Freud's retrospective at the Hayward Gallery earlier this year brought together the paintings of a lifetime. The exhibition was seen as a revelation in London, as it had been in Washington and Paris. The critic Robert Hughes called him the greatest living realist painter. Freud is an intensely private man. He's rarely been photographed, and he's never given an interview on camera. In February, he did allow us to film him as he was hanging the show at the Hayward, with artist Frank Auerbach and exhibition organizer Catherine Lampert. And some weeks later, Freud agreed finally to talk at length. He chose to record an informal conversation rather than be interviewed by a critic or an art historian. He spoke to Omnibus director Jake Auerbach at the Hayward Gallery.
The first thing I wonder is what it's like to see the pictures again.
Well, I haven't seen lots of them together before. It's very surprising, and they're not as I remember them. Some are not as I remember them, because it might be to do with their having travelled and their minds having been broadened forcibly, but I doubt it.
When you look back, I mean, obviously, the things that you've done have changed a lot over the years. How do you feel about the things, the early works, for example?
I don't feel much more than there they are. I don't mean when I look at early things, I think they're ignorant so much as much more limited. But then I was obviously much more limited or very different, and I felt I had much less freedom than I have now, and I haven't got that much now. But
So
certainly they were more, more willed, but in an inflexible way.
The learning, that's come from everything, not just painting. I mean, everything that happens helps.
Yes, it's very hard. I'm not very analytical, and not. I mean, I'm self-questioning, but only up to a point. It's hard to say. It's to do with the days going by, and also I never think about technique in anything. I think it holds you up. I think that if things look wrong or ugly in a way which actually clogs the information or feeling you're trying to convey, then obviously you're going about it the wrong way. But you have to take paint on trust.
Are there any pictures that have surprised you in particular, that seem to have changed?
No, there's one I thought was going to be much worse than it actually is. But then I was slightly dreading seeing that, and it's, I think that any degree of apprehension of that sort it is often exaggerated by time, and in fact it's not as awful as I thought. At least bits of it. I thought the hands were all right in this, for instance, and I thought the whole thing would be stilted rather. There are quite a lot done from the similar subjects, or the same people, say, and I've been quite interested to see them together and see how they look together. And so that's really my chief interest from a visual point of view. It's really to do with the idea of being, of not having free will and thinking I'm doing something in a different way and seeing new sides of it, but realizing that because of my given nature, it's very, very hard to do, and I don't want to make them different for the sake of it. I want to make them different because it's later, and I feel different, and so do they.
That feels right immediately.
It's much better. Yeah. You know, the strange thing is if the people are, if it's hung by people, it very often seems to work. It's not a principle you can rely on.
No, but you're right. It does. Well, it's not really surprising since it all behaves so differently when different people are sitting.
Yeah.
I wondered what lights you like and how things change for you in different lights.
Well, in the daylight, of course, it changes much more, but it's more exciting because you see more. Sometimes you see much more, and things change all the time. And I prefer high cloud, but any kind of light's okay for me. And the sun, bright sun, is more challenging because I work under skylight. But then there's one compensating thing, that things can never look as bad as they will under a really strong bright light, especially under the sunlight.
Are there real technical changes, say, when you're working with artificial light as well?
No, I think that my palette's limited, and because of the light being a different color, you have to take certain things on trust, which you've learned from working in the day.
Was, say, the light in Paris, was that appealing at all? Or?
Yes, is pretty marvelous in Paris, I think of it. And it didn't ever seem to get as dingy as in London, but I worked chiefly in hotel rooms, and generally very near the window, because they were small rooms.
And was Paris interesting in other ways? I mean,
Yes, it was. I used to be very stimulated by it, but I only ever had hotel room life there, which is agreeable enough, but limiting. You're at the mercy of the maid. I mean, she only has to knock your easel or anything, and it can cause terrible damage and chaos.
do you find that different moods affect the way that you paint?
My ones?
Yes.
Well, I try and keep as calm as I can always, but and I'm always on the occasions that things go well, I try and recreate circumstances, similar ones, hoping that the result will be similar, but it doesn't, of course, work. But I even think of what I've eaten or haven't, and to do with the number of hours I've slept, all sorts of things. I try and remake conditions, even though it never seems to be like that. To try and keep up a good run.
Do things tend to happen all together? I mean, if you're having a good run, do all paintings go well?
Yes, and if they go badly, things go badly, the others are inclined to. And but I think that's so in every activity, in sports and everything, that or even having a dance or something, you suddenly do a good step or a movement, and you suddenly think you can dance, and then it obviously gives you confidence. And if you, it happens in everything, I think. It happens in conversation. People say something which makes somebody else laugh or impresses them, and then they suddenly become more and more astonishing and witty, even. I know some of them
Tate Gallery heavy security framing. Yes, it's very impressive.
Perhaps it's to give the potential burglars very close range, do you think?
Yes, and that over there. I don't know if that's works, but I thought I like that one with three little hairs that have some clothes. What about that? That's very nice.
I think so. I think that looks nice.
Do you have aspirations or wishes for how people will react to the work, seeing it together?
No, I don't care at all. I hope a lot of people will go, and I naturally, because there is a megalomaniacal side to nearly all artists, I hope they'll be affected in some way. But whether it's adversely or agreeably, what is the opposite? Yes, I don't care at all about that. I'm fairly immune from praise and abuse, but there are very few number of people where what they think would count a lot for me.
Do you think of other artists at all when you're hanging an exhibition?
I've hardly ever I've hardly ever hung it because Frank's been kind enough to help me, and the fact that he does it with such authority makes me feel, well, I marvel at it and occasionally have an idea. I'm rather like a car that seems to be driving along, but in fact is being quietly pushed by someone who knows exactly what's happening, which way to go.
You don't, as a rule, use models that work at being models?
No, I haven't really, because I like to think that they don't mind being there, and the idea of I quite like the idea of their posing for me being a specific part of something they're doing for me. And with models, they'd have an idea about posing in itself, which is exactly what I'm trying not to do. I want them to be themselves, I don't want to use them for an idea I've got where I must use a figure, let's have that one. I actually want to do them. And even the identical twin wouldn't do at all if I didn't know them.
Do your feelings change about people through having painted them?
Very much, yes. You mean when I'm working from them? Yes.
Is that, does it change in the same way as if you just know someone longer?
No, it's to do with all sorts of things, to do with the conditions of their life, insofar as they manifest themselves on them, and to do with circumstances, to do with things they say.
How is it different for you doing a nude portrait to a clothed portrait?
Well, I suppose I'm more concerned for them if they're naked, the people I work from. Chiefly keeping them warm is my chief concern. But, I mean, if they aren't at ease at the beginning, they will soon become so, because it's such a long job and long term.
It's very different to do a portrait of oneself.
Yes.
Rather than of a human being.
It's completely different. It's very tempting because of your permanent availability, but I do start more self-portraits and destroy more than any other pictures because they seem to, in my case, they seem to go wrong so very, very often, and I haven't found a way of doing them. Not that I've found a way of doing anything, but I feel that they should become easier, and they don't. There's also an important point. You can't see yourself like you can other people. All you can see is a reflection, and I've tried to paint the actual reflection that I see, which is why I actually call them reflections, rather than for any poetic reason.
Do you try and avoid things when you're doing a self-portrait?
I trying to avoid anything any expression on my part which seems to me to be viewing oneself in a pleasant or conciliatory light, and so I notice from self-portraits very, very often that I look at people tend to make themselves look, give themselves a kind of grandeur, which I'm not saying they haven't got it, but which they certainly don't give to other people. And I don't know if I succeed in this, but I'm conscious of trying to avoid that very much. But then, of course, I think it would be equally false to make yourself look meaner than you were, if this were possible, because it would be dramatizing it in another way, and in a way, in a more trivial way, in a sense.
What's the difference for you, painting a single portrait and a portrait of two people?
Well, two people are harder, firstly because I'm outnumbered, and there is a certain combative element, only insofar that you want them to sit as you wish, and just suggesting it and so on, and controlling them, maybe just with movements of the head. It means twice as much control has to be exercised like two circus animals.
Are there times maybe where you'd start a single portrait and then decide that it would be better if they were there with someone else?
It's happened recently, yes, but I did have to extend the canvas quite a lot. So it wasn't, I very much didn't want it to look as if the other person had wandered into the picture and edged over to try and get in. I wanted it to look inevitable. Especially since there's a point of contact in this picture. But then there's, do you know that Rembrandt, The Conspiracy of the Batavians? With a man with one eye and so on. There's when he cut the picture down, which in fact was the largest picture he'd ever done, there's a huge looming figure in the foreground, and that was painted on right at the end. Did you know that or not? And once you know it, in a sense, you could say it looked like it, and yet you can't conceive of the picture without it, and it makes it even more wild and dangerous looking.
Yes. So do you match yourself against the artists of the past?
I think of great pictures perhaps rather than great artists. Right. There's some very few painters where like everything they did because it's by them. But on the whole, they're marvelous pictures that have affected me and touched me that I think of. And that, you know, obviously I try to do as well as realizing it's absolutely impossible.
Are they a steady first team?
They vary, depending on where my sympathies lie. But, you know, as some years ago when I was in Scotland, I went every day to see the two big Titians in the National Gallery there. In fact, one of the pictures that's here when I'd nearly finished it, when I got back, I repainted it because of looking at them. Then I went upstairs, and there was a Rembrandt there, pretty good one, and it looked so stodgy. I'm not saying by this I like Titian better, or it means more to me. In fact, I wouldn't have said that was the case at all. It's just I got really, the more I looked at the pictures, the more I saw in them. I even literally saw more. I found more and more dogs the more I looked at them.
Have you used paintings of the past to maybe solve problems that you've had with paintings that you're doing?
Not in a direct way, but I go at the National Gallery rather like going to a doctor for help. And it's really to reaffirm my belief in something which, in my hands, has ceased to be plausible, or at the time that I go. So I go with a certain urgency. One of the exciting things about going to see a large and very rich, varied collection, you get suddenly something comes into focus for you, a picture. I mean, its qualities and its beauties and its life, which you'd never looked at before, except just there it is. And so it's to do with a change in your head.
What, from sort of other branches of the arts, do you enjoy?
Sculpture very much. I mean, the pleasure I get from looking at sculpture is I get from nothing else at all.
And films or books?
I've rather stopped seeing films, not because I dislike them. In fact, I like them very much, and at one point used to see 2 a day. But it's really to do with staring at people most of the day and a lot of the night. The concentration on seeing a film is something I don't really especially want. But
take off your shawl. You mustn't be frightened if I look at you. I'm not looking at you as a man looks. A painter. Painters have a different way of looking at things. You must imagine that I'm looking at you in the same way as the water with which you wash yourself, or the air you move in, or the light that shines on you. That sees you, you know, all the time, even when you're quite alone. You mustn't even know I'm looking at you.
Of the films you've seen,
Well, I've just said.
have you seen any where an artist has been portrayed as a...
That's no good. I want that frightened look.
I saw Charles Laughton as Rembrandt long ago.
How was he?
I was more conscious of him being Charles Laughton than Rembrandt, but it didn't. The film was still pretty exciting, and it didn't make you think about art or anything, but that I don't think that probably would have helped the film. Have you seen any?
Well, I was thinking of there's the Tony Hancock film.
Oh, yes,
Rebel.
yes.
Easy, Mrs. Javert.
Mind where you're walking?
I think that the comic part was to do with the confusion of his resentment against the life of being a commuter, and made him look to art as a sort of salvation. And I think that already makes it almost impossible to start if you see it in that way.
Oh, you temptress. Oh, you voluptuous Jezebel. My Aphrodite. What carnal desires did you stir in the breasts of helpless men? If ever a devil was born without a pair of horns, it was you, Jezebel, it was you. Go on, I'm gonna win her here, mate.
And I think one reason why people imagine artists have these strange and different and wild lives is because of their work, or a lot of their work. And I think that on seeing their work, they make certain assumptions about their life, but you can't generalize about anybody's lives, but they don't realize that it's a life of self-discipline. Even though that self-discipline may be a self-indulgence, it's nevertheless a discipline, or no work could be done. And they, people assume, it's an amazing idea, that the art that's produced comes out by mistake, like a kind of byproduct of this this extraordinary, anarchic, idyllic, undisciplined way of life. But I've never heard of anyone working like this.
Do you find that the process of finishing a painting, does that tend to happen over a long period of time? Do you build to that sort of steadily, or can it happen very quickly?
It sometimes takes me by surprise. I think something is in the middle, and I suddenly realize I'm practically going around the last bend towards the finish. But then, conversely, sometimes I think something is nearly done, and I realize that quite an important part doesn't really work, and I might go on for a long time on it, and everything in the painting changes everything else in it, and so something that seemed to be all right as you go further, it might be very near the end, suddenly ceases to work and has to be remade.
With the paintings of the plants, maybe, or the paintings out of the windows, how much is that a different discipline for you from the portraits?
It feels quite different. The plants, certainly, the two plants nearly drove me around the bend.
Really?
I felt I was composing an enormous symphony, and since I'm completely unmusical, the difficulties were there then. And when I took one tiny leaf and changed it, it affected whole areas of it, and so on. It was just... And painting out of the window, I think I've generally done it when my life's been very strained. Not as a result, but thinking about it afterwards. It's connected with periods of strain when working on my own seemed easier for me than, because I couldn't have thought with the same concentration about the people I was working from than I usually do, because concentration's one of the most important things there is for painting.
Do you get pleasure from looking at other people's landscapes?
Very much, yes. Very much.
Is there any painter in particular that you think of?
Constable, really. I like almost everything he did, and especially the way that he uses people in his landscapes. And it's very much the same feeling as you get when you're looking at a view and you suddenly see there's some people in a path in the distance, and you feel that they're tiny as they are, they still dominate the life around them, and I think that's the most marvelous feat, to be able to do that.
Your landscapes don't tend to have people in.
No, they. I've tried in the few I've done. I've tried to use people, but they've never. They've come in and disappeared again because they weren't strong enough. I think that if you had a landscape of your own, as it were, in the way that your room is your own, you could then people it at your discretion, and on the other hand, it would be a very elaborate enterprise, and I'm perfectly happy working behind closed doors.
Place is obviously important.
Yes, very.
How difficult is it to move studio?
Well, it's ideally it's nice. You can't know a place well enough, and I've moved about occasionally, but it's something very suspect about a new place, because even though you don't think of it until you move, if some pictures have gone well in where you worked, you wonder to what degree, you only wonder when you move to what degree this has become a part of it. And
Yes.
so there's a degree of having to break in a new place. It can only be done if you do something that works in it, and then it makes it easier, subsequently easier.
By being somewhere, you gain a knowledge of it, but do you gain a greater knowledge of the room, say, by painting?
By painting in it?
Or painting parts of it?
Oh, absolutely, yes, because then there's the door and the window and the ceiling and the skirting, and they're all things to be considered, and they've all been painted before, perhaps in different ways, or so that they're ready, they're waiting there as part of the room to help you should you need them. So in that way, it's a great help. And even knowing things like the way a door opens and the way a window doesn't shut, all those things are a help. All that kind of knowledge is a help, I think.
Are there still subjects that you'd like to paint, perhaps?
Yeah, any amount. I think of every day I think of things I'd like to do. They relate to things I've done, but
I mean, are there any things that you'd like to do but you feel you can't? Or?
Well, the fact that I feel I can't wouldn't deter me at all. In fact, the opposite. But if you're painting humans, you've got the best subject matter in the world, and you can really do as much with them as they could do themselves.
And so the subjects maybe that you still want to paint are people?
Absolutely, yes. And when I'm not painting them, which is rare, I feel I'm being pretty frivolous.